The autumn sun cast long shadows across the suburban street as Sophie trudged home from school. Her usual bounce was conspicuously absent, replaced by an unusual hesitancy in her step. At 10 years old, Sophie was typically a whirlwind of energy and chatter, but today, an eerie quiet surrounded her like a shroud. Clara, Sophie's mother, watched from the kitchen window as her daughter made her way up the driveway. Something was off. The girl's backpack seemed to weigh heavily on her small frame, and there was a slight hitch in her gait that made Clara's heart skip a beat. As Sophie entered the house, Clara greeted her with a warm smile, hoping to coax out the usual flood of stories about her day. But Sophie's eyes remained downcast, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Everything okay, sweetie?" Clara asked, kneeling to meet her daughter's gaze. Sophie shifted uncomfortably, her fingers twisting the hem of her school shirt. "It hurts," she whispered, so softly Clara almost missed it. "What hurts, honey? Did you fall at recess?" Sophie shook her head, her golden curls bouncing slightly. "No, it hurts down there." Her voice trembled, and she gestured vaguely towards her lower body. Clara felt a chill run down her spine. A million thoughts raced through her mind, each more terrifying than the last. She took a deep breath, forcing herself to remain calm for Sophie's sake. "Can you tell me what happened?" Clara asked gently, guiding Sophie to sit on the couch. Sophie's lower lip quivered. "It happened at school," she mumbled, her eyes filling with tears. Clara's maternal instincts went into overdrive. She wanted to press for more information, to understand what could have possibly happened to her little girl. But Sophie's withdrawn demeanor and evident discomfort made her hesitate. "Sophie, sweetheart," Clara said, her voice steady despite the fear churning in her stomach. "I know it's hard to talk about, but I need to know if someone hurt you. You can tell me anything, okay?" Sophie nodded slowly, but remained silent, her small body tense with unspoken distress. Clara's mind raced with possibilities. Had there been an accident? Was it a medical issue they'd somehow missed? Or was it something far more sinister? The thought made her feel sick, but she knew she had to stay strong for Sophie. "Honey, I know it's scary, but I need to check to make sure you're okay. Is that all right?" Clara asked, her heart pounding. After a moment's hesitation, Sophie gave a small nod. Clara gently helped her daughter stand, noticing again the slight limp that seemed to cause Sophie pain with each step. As they made their way to Sophie's room, Clara's mind whirled with worst-case scenarios. She silently prayed that her fears were unfounded, that there would be a simple explanation for Sophie's distress. But the knot in her stomach told her that whatever she was about to discover would change their lives forever. Clara's hands trembled slightly as she helped Sophie onto her bed. The cheerful butterfly patterns on the comforter seemed to mock the gravity of the situation. Sophie's room, usually a haven of laughter and imagination, now felt oppressive with unspoken fears. "Okay, sweetie," Clara said, keeping her voice soft and reassuring. "Can you show me where it hurts?" Sophie hesitated, then slowly pointed to her upper thigh. Clara's breath caught in her throat as she gently rolled up the hem of Sophie's skirt. What she saw made her blood run cold. A large, angry bruise marred Sophie's fair skin, just above her knee. The discoloration was a mottled purple and blue, with hints of yellow at the edges. It was clear that this was no ordinary playground injury. Clara's mind raced, trying to process what she was seeing. How had this happened? Why hadn't Sophie said anything earlier? And most importantly, who was responsible? "Oh, Sophie," Clara breathed, struggling to keep her voice steady. "This looks painful. Can you tell me how it happened?" Sophie's lower lip trembled, and tears began to spill down her cheeks. I didn't mean to fall," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Clara's heart clenched. Fall. This didn't look like any fall she'd ever seen. The location and severity of the bruise set off alarm bells in her head. She knew she needed to get Sophie medical attention immediately, but she also didn't want to frighten her daughter further. "It's okay, sweetie," Clara soothed, gently pulling Sophie's skirt back down. "You're not in trouble. I just want to make sure you're all right." As Clara helped Sophie sit up, she noticed her daughter wincing in pain. The movement seemed to aggravate whatever injury lay beneath the surface. Clara's maternal instincts warred with her rising panic. She wanted nothing more than to gather Sophie in her arms and promise that everything would be okay. But she knew that right now, action was more important than comfort. "Sophie, I think we need to have a doctor take a look at this," Clara said, trying to keep her voice calm and matter-of-fact. "They'll be able to help make it feel better?" Sophie's eyes widened with fear. "No, I don't want to go to the doctor," she cried, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. Clara's heart broke at the sight of her daughter's distress. She sat on the edge of the bed, carefully pulling Sophie into a gentle embrace. "I know it's scary, sweetheart, but we need to make sure you're okay. I'll be with you the whole time. I promise." As she held her trembling daughter, Clara's mind whirled with possibilities. The bruise, Sophie's reluctance to talk, the mysterious fall. None of it added up to anything good. She knew she needed to get Sophie help, and fast. With a deep breath, Clara made a decision. This was beyond her ability to handle alone. She needed professional help, and she needed it now. "Sophie, honey," she said, pulling back to look into her daughter's tear-stained face. "I'm going to call for some help, okay? We're going to make sure you're all right." Sophie nodded mutely, her small body still shaking with silent sobs. Clara reached for her phone, her fingers hovering over the keypad. She knew that what she was about to do would set in motion a chain of events that could change their lives forever. But as she looked at her daughter, vulnerable and in pain, she knew she had no choice. With a deep breath, Clara dialed 911. The phone rang only once before a calm, professional voice answered. "911, what's your emergency?" Clara's heart raced as she tried to keep her voice steady. "I need an ambulance," she said, surprised at how calm she sounded, despite the panic coursing through her veins. "It's my daughter. She's 10. She came home from school with an injury. I'm not sure what happened, but she's in pain and there's bruising." The dispatcher's voice remained steady, a lifeline in the storm of Clara's emotions. "I understand, ma'am. Can you tell me your location?" Clara rattled off her address, her free hand stroking Sophie's hair as her daughter leaned against her, still sniffling quietly. "An ambulance is on its way," the dispatcher assured her. "Can you tell me more about your daughter's condition? Is she conscious and breathing normally?" "Yes, she's awake," Clara replied, her eyes never leaving Sophie's face. "She's breathing fine, but she's in pain. There's a large bruise on her upper thigh, and she's having trouble walking." "Okay, thank you for that information. I'm going to stay on the line with you until the paramedics arrive. Can you tell me your daughter's name?" "Sophie," Clara said, her voice catching slightly. "Her name is Sophie." "All right, Clara," the dispatcher said, her tone reassuring. "You're doing great. Can you tell me if Sophie has any allergies or medical conditions the paramedics should know about?" Clara shook her head, then remembered she was on the phone. No allergies or conditions." As Clara answered the dispatcher's questions, she could hear the faint wail of sirens in the distance, growing steadily louder. Sophie stirred at the sound, her blue eyes wide with fear. "It's okay, sweetie," Clara soothed, pulling her daughter close. "Some nice people are coming to help make you feel better." The sirens grew louder, and soon Clara could see the flashing lights through the bedroom window. The dispatcher's voice came through the phone once more. "The ambulance has arrived. Clara, can you go let them in?" Clara hesitated, not wanting to leave Sophie's side. "Sophie, honey, I need to go let the helpers in. I'll be right back, okay?" Sophie nodded, her small hand clutching Clara's shirt. With a reassuring smile, Clara gently disentangled herself and hurried to the front door. Two paramedics, a man and a woman, stood on her porch, their faces kind but professional. "Ma'am, we received a call about an injured child," the woman said. Clara nodded, stepping back to let them in. "Yes, my daughter Sophie. She's upstairs in her room." As they made their way up the stairs, Clara filled them in on what little she knew. The female paramedic, whose name tag read Sarah, listened intently while her partner, Mike, carried their equipment. When they entered Sophie's room, Clara's heart clenched at the sight of her daughter looking so small and vulnerable on the bed. Sarah approached Sophie with a gentle smile. "Hi, Sophie. I'm Sarah," she said, kneeling beside the bed. "Your mom called us because she's worried about you. Can you tell me where it hurts?" Sophie looked at Clara, who nodded encouragingly. "My leg," Sophie whispered, pointing to her thigh. As Sarah began her examination, Clara watched anxiously, her mind racing with unanswered questions. What had happened at school? Why hadn't Sophie told her teacher? And most importantly, who was responsible for her daughter's pain? The paramedics worked efficiently, their gentle voices and calm demeanor helping to soothe both Sophie and Clara. But as they prepared to transport Sophie to the hospital, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of a long and difficult journey. The ambulance ride to the hospital was a blur of flashing lights and tense silence. Clara held Sophie's hand tightly, her thumb tracing soothing circles on her daughter's palm. The paramedics had been kind and professional, but their carefully neutral expressions did little to allay Clara's fears. As they arrived at the emergency room, Clara found herself swept up in a whirlwind of activity. Nurses and doctors swarmed around Sophie, asking questions and performing quick assessments. Clara tried to stay close, but soon found herself gently but firmly ushered out of the examination room. "We need to do a thorough examination," a kind-faced nurse explained. "It won't take long, and we'll come get you as soon as we're done." Clara nodded numbly, allowing herself to be led to a nearby waiting area. As she sank into an uncomfortable plastic chair, the full weight of the situation crashed down upon her. Her mind raced with terrible possibilities, each scenario more horrifying than the last. Had Sophie been bullied at school? Was this a case of physical abuse? Or was it something even worse? The thought made Clara's stomach churn, but she couldn't push it away. As a mother, she had always been aware of the dangers that lurked in the world, but she had never imagined they would touch her own family. Time seemed to stretch endlessly as Clara waited. She watched other families come and go, their own dramas playing out in hushed conversations and worried glances. A young couple cradled a feverish toddler. An elderly man comforted his wife as she winced in pain. In any other circumstance, Clara might have felt empathy for these strangers. But now, her world had narrowed to a pinpoint focus on her daughter. After what felt like hours but was probably only 45 minutes, a doctor approached Clara. His face was serious, and Clara felt her heart drop to her stomach. "Mrs. Thompson?" he asked, extending his hand. "I'm Dr. Patel. I've been examining your daughter, Sophie." Clara stood on shaky legs, shaking the doctor's hand automatically. "How is she? Is she okay? What happened?" "Doctor." Patel gestured for Clara to sit back down, taking the seat next to her. His somber expression did nothing to calm Clara's nerves. "Mrs. Thompson, I need to ask you some difficult questions," he began, his voice low and serious. "Has Sophie mentioned any problems at school? Any conflicts with teachers or other adults?" Clara's blood ran cold. The implication behind the doctor's words was clear, and it was her worst fear come to life. "No," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Nothing like that. Why? What did you find?" Dr. Patel leaned forward, his eyes kind but intense. "The bruising on Sophie's leg is quite severe, and its location is concerning. We need to rule out any possibility of abuse or inappropriate contact." The world seemed to tilt on its axis as Clara processed the doctor's words. Abuse. Inappropriate contact. The clinical terms barely masked the horror they represented. Clara felt as though she might be sick. "No," she said, more forcefully this time. "No, that's impossible. Sophie would have told me if something like that had happened. She knows she can always talk to me." Dr. Patel nodded sympathetically. "I understand this is difficult to hear, Mrs. Thompson, but it's our duty to consider all possibilities when a child presents with injuries like Sophie's. We've contacted Child Protective Services, and they'll be sending someone to speak with you and Sophie. Clara's mind reeled. Child Protective Services. This couldn't be happening. She was a good mother. She protected Sophie, loved her, would do anything for her. How could anyone think she would allow her daughter to be hurt? I need to see her, Clara said, standing abruptly. I need to talk to Sophie. Dr. Patel stood as well, placing a gentle hand on Clara's arm. Of course. But please understand, we need to conduct a thorough investigation. It's for Sophie's protection. As Clara followed the doctor back to the examination room, her mind whirled with a maelstrom of emotions. Fear, anger, confusion, and an overwhelming sense of helplessness threatened to drown her. But beneath it all, a steely determination took root. Whatever had happened to Sophie, whatever they were about to face, Clara knew one thing for certain. She would fight with everything she had to protect her daughter. Clara's heart pounded as she entered Sophie's examination room. Her daughter looked small and vulnerable on the hospital bed, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. A nurse was adjusting Sophie's IV, and Clara had to resist the urge to rush to her daughter's side and sweep her into a protective embrace. Mom! Sophie's voice was a mix of relief and lingering fear. Clara moved to the bedside, taking Sophie's hand in hers. I'm here, sweetie. Everything's going to be okay. Dr. Patel cleared his throat gently. Sophie, we need to ask you some questions about what happened. Is that all right? Sophie nodded hesitantly, her grip on Clara's hand tightening. Can you tell us how you got hurt? Dr. Patel asked, his voice kind but firm. Sophie's lower lip trembled. I fell at school. Clara's heart skipped a beat. This was the moment of truth. She held her breath, dreading what might come next. Can you tell us more about how you fell? Dr. Patel pressed gently. Sophie's eyes filled with fresh tears. I was running, and I tripped, but it wasn't my fault. The words came out in a rush now. Tommy stuck his foot out, and I couldn't stop in time. I hit the corner of Mrs. Johnson's desk really hard. Clara felt a wave of relief wash over her, quickly followed by confusion. Sophie, why didn't you tell your teacher? Sophie looked down, shame coloring her cheeks. I didn't want to get Tommy in trouble. And I felt stupid for falling. The other kids laughed. Dr. Patel's expression softened. Sophie, you did nothing wrong. Accidents happen, even when they're caused by others being unkind. As the truth unfolded, Clara's mind raced to catch up. Clara's relief was palpable. But a new worry took root in her heart. Her daughter had been hurt, not by some unspeakable act, but by bullying, a different kind of pain, but one that cut deep nonetheless. Dr. Patel turned to Clara, his expression softening. Mrs. Thompson, I owe you an apology. We have to consider all possibilities in cases like these, but I'm relieved to say that our initial concerns were unfounded. Clara nodded, still processing the roller coaster of emotions she'd experienced in the last few hours. What about her injury? Is Sophie going to be okay? The doctor smiled reassuringly. The good news is that while the bruising looks severe, there's no serious internal damage. Sophie will be sore for a while, and she'll need to take it easy. But with proper care and rest, she should heal completely. As Dr. Patel explained the treatment plan, ice packs, gentle exercises, and follow-up appointments, Clara found her thoughts drifting to the larger issue at hand. Her daughter had been bullied, and she hadn't known. How long had this been going on? What else might Sophie be keeping from her? Sophie, sweetie, Clara said gently, once the doctor had finished his explanation. Why didn't you tell me about Tommy, or about feeling embarrassed at school? Sophie's eyes welled up with fresh tears. I didn't want you to worry, she whispered. And I thought maybe if I ignored it, it would stop. Clara's heart broke at her daughter's words. She perched on the edge of the hospital bed, carefully gathering Sophie into her arms. Oh, honey, it's my job to worry about you. You can always tell me when something's bothering you. no matter how small it might seem. As Sophie cried softly into her shoulder, Clara made a silent vow. This incident may not have been the nightmare scenario she'd initially feared, but it was a wake-up call. She needed to create an environment where Sophie felt safe sharing everything, her triumphs, her fears, and especially her pain. Dr. Patel cleared his throat softly. Mrs. Thompson, given the circumstances, will need to file a report with the school. Bullying is a serious issue, and they need to be made aware of the situation. Clara nodded, her mind already racing with next steps. She'd need to speak with Sophie's teacher, the principal, maybe even consider therapy to help Sophie process her feelings and build confidence. As if reading her thoughts, Dr. Patel added, "We have resources available, counselors who specialize in helping children deal with bullying and its aftermath. I'd be happy to provide you with some referrals." "Thank you," Clara said, genuine gratitude in her voice. "I think that would be very helpful." As the doctor excused himself to prepare Sophie's discharge papers, Clara found herself reflecting on the day's events. The fear and panic she'd felt earlier had been replaced by a mix of relief and determination. They had dodged a terrible bullet, but the experience had exposed cracks in their communication that needed to be addressed. Sophie stirred in her arms, looking up with red-rimmed eyes. "Mom? Are you mad at me?" Clara smoothed back Sophie's tangled curls, planting a kiss on her forehead. "No, sweetie, I'm not mad. I'm just so glad you're okay. But we need to talk about what happened and how we can make sure you always feel safe telling me things, okay?" Sophie nodded, a flicker of relief crossing her face. As they waited for the discharge process to be completed, Clara's mind was already formulating a plan. This incident, frightening as it had been, would become a turning point for their family. No more secrets, no more suffering in silence. They would face whatever came next, be it bullies, bruises, or life's many challenges, together. The drive home from the hospital was quiet, the rhythmic swoosh of windshield wipers keeping time with the soft patter of rain outside. Clara's mind raced with everything she'd learned, while Sophie dozed in the back seat, exhausted from the day's events. As Clara pulled into their driveway, she gently roused Sophie. "We're home, sweetie. Let's get you inside and comfortable." Once Sophie was settled on the living room couch, a blanket tucked around her and an ice pack on her bruised leg, Clara knew it was time for a deeper conversation. She perched on the edge of the coffee table, facing her daughter. "Sophie," she began gently, "I know you're tired, but we need to talk about what's been happening at school. Can you tell me about Tommy and the other kids?" Sophie's lower lip trembled, but she nodded bravely. "Tommy? He's always been mean. He calls me names and sometimes pushes me in the hallway. Today, when he tripped me, I think he just wanted to make everyone laugh. I don't think he meant for me to get hurt so bad." Clara's heart clenched at the matter-of-fact way Sophie described the bullying, as if it were a normal part of her day. "Has this been going on for a long time?" Sophie shrugged, picking at a loose thread on the blanket. "A few months, I guess. It got worse after I got a good grade on the science project. Tommy said I was a teacher's pet, and that nobody likes a know-it-all." Anger flared in Clara's chest. At Tommy, at the teachers who should have noticed, at herself for not realizing something was wrong. But she kept her voice calm, knowing Sophie needed support, not more tension. "Sophie, what Tommy's doing is not okay. It's bullying, and it's not your fault. You didn't do anything wrong by being smart or getting good grades." Tears welled up in Sophie's eyes. "But if I wasn't so me, maybe the other kids would like me more." Clara moved to the couch, carefully gathering Sophie into her arms. "Oh, sweetheart, being you is the most wonderful thing you can be. The problem isn't you. It's Tommy, and anyone else who makes you feel bad about yourself." As Sophie cried softly, Clara's mind whirled with next steps. She needed to contact the school immediately, set up meetings with Sophie's teacher and the principal. They needed a plan to address the bullying and ensure Sophie's safety. But first, she needed to make sure Sophie understood she wasn't alone in this. "Sophie, I want you to listen to me very carefully," Clara said. gently tilting her daughter's chin up to meet her eyes. "What happened today? Keeping your pain a secret, being afraid to tell me what was going on. That can't happen again. I'm your mom, and it's my job to help you and protect you. But I can't do that if I don't know what's wrong." Sophie nodded, hiccuping slightly as her tears subsided. "I'm sorry, Mom. I didn't want you to think I was weak." Clara's heart broke at her daughter's words. "Sweetheart, asking for help when you need it isn't weak. It's one of the bravest things you can do." As they talked, Clara began to see the full picture of what Sophie had been enduring. The subtle changes in her daughter's behavior, the reluctance to go to school some mornings, the vague answers about her day, suddenly made sense in this new context. "Tomorrow," Clara said, once Sophie had shared everything she could, "I'm going to call your school. We're going to talk to your teacher and the principal about what's been happening. And I think it might be good for you to talk to someone too. A counselor who can help you process your feelings and learn ways to stand up for yourself." Sophie looked uncertain. Will that make the bullying stop? Clara wished she could promise that it would, but she knew better than to make guarantees. "It's going to be a process, my sweetie, but we're going to do everything we can to make school a safe place for you again. And no matter what happens, I want you to remember that you can always come to me. No problem is too big or too small." As Sophie nodded, Clara saw a glimmer of hope in her daughter's eyes. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but they would face it together. This painful experience had exposed the cracks in their communication, but it had also given them a chance to build something stronger. Clara pulled Sophie close, mindful of her injured leg. "I love you so much, Sophie. We're going to get through this, I promise." As Sophie nestled against her, Clara felt a fierce determination well up inside her. The fear and panic of the day were giving way to a new resolve. She would do whatever it took to protect her daughter, not just from physical harm, but from the insidious damage that bullying could inflict on a young spirit. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, difficult conversations with school administrators, decisions about counseling, and the ongoing task of rebuilding Sophie's confidence. But for now, Clara focused on the warmth of her daughter in her arms, grateful for the truth that had finally come to light and the opportunity it gave them to heal and grow stronger together. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity for Clara and Sophie. True to her word, Clara had immediately contacted the school, setting up meetings with Sophie's teacher, the principal, and the school counselor. The gravity of the situation became clear as they delved into the extent of the bullying Sophie had endured. Mrs. Johnson, Sophie's teacher, had been horrified to learn of the incident. "I had no idea it had gotten so bad," she'd said, her face pale with concern. "Sophie always seemed so composed. I noticed she was quieter lately, but I assumed it was just preteen moodiness." The principal, Mr. Daniels, had taken the matter seriously, implementing immediate measures to address the bullying. Tommy and his friends faced disciplinary action, and the school rolled out an enhanced anti-bullying program for all students. But for Clara, the most important steps were the ones happening at home. She and Sophie had begun seeing a family therapist, Dr. Evelyn Chen, who specialized in helping children deal with bullying and its aftermath. "Remember," Dr. Chen had said in their first session, "healing is a process. There will be good days and bad days. The key is to keep the lines of communication open." Those words became a mantra for Clara as she and Sophie navigated this new chapter in their relationship. They instituted nightly chat time, a sacred space where Sophie could share anything on her mind without fear of judgment. It wasn't always easy. Some nights, Sophie was reluctant to open up, the old habits of keeping things to herself hard to break. Other times, the floodgates would open, and Sophie would pour out her fears and frustrations in a torrent of words and tears. Through it all, Clara listened. She offered comfort when Sophie needed it, advice when asked for it, and always, her unconditional love and support. Slowly but surely, Clara began to see changes in her daughter. The sparkle returned to Sophie's eyes. She began to stand a little taller, Speak a little louder. The morning battles to get ready for school eased, replaced by a cautious optimism about the day ahead. One evening, about a month after the incident, Clara and Sophie sat on the porch swing, enjoying the warm spring air. Sophie had been quiet, seemingly lost in thought. "Penny for your thoughts?" Clara asked gently, bumping her shoulder against Sophie's. Sophie looked up, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "I was just thinking, I'm kind of glad it happened. The falling, not the bullying part, but, Clara raised an eyebrow, surprised. "Oh, why's that?" Sophie was quiet for a moment, gathering her thoughts. Because now we talk. Like, really talk. And I know that no matter what happens, you've got my back. It's like I'm not facing the world alone anymore." Tears pricked at Clara's eyes as she pulled Sophie into a hug. "Oh, sweetheart. You were never alone. But I'm so glad you know that now, deep in your heart." As they sat there, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Clara reflected on their journey. The fear and panic of that day in the hospital seemed like a lifetime ago. In its place was a new understanding, a deeper bond between mother and daughter. The bullying wasn't magically gone. Sophie still had tough days at school, moments when the old insecurities crept back in. But now, she had tools to deal with it. She had a support system, at home, at school, and with Dr. Chen, to help her navigate the choppy waters of adolescence. More importantly, Sophie had found her voice. She was learning to stand up for herself, to value her own worth regardless of what others thought. And she was learning that asking for help wasn't a sign of weakness, but a source of strength. As for Clara, she had learned lessons too, about the importance of creating a safe space for open communication, about balancing protection with empowerment, about the strength it takes to face fears head-on, whether you're 10 or 40. The incident that had started with a whispered complaint of pain had blossomed into a transformative experience for both of them. It had tested their bond and ultimately strengthened it, creating a foundation of trust and understanding that Clara knew would serve them well in the years to come. As the first stars began to twinkle in the deepening twilight, Clara squeezed Sophie's hand. "I love you, my brave girl." Sophie squeezed back. "I love you too, Mom. Thanks for always listening." In that moment, Clara knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, with open hearts, honest words, and the unshakable bond between a mother and her daughter.
Disclaimer: this channel does not support or tolerate any form of discrimination, racism, prejudice, or violation of human rights. The stories presented here are original and created by the author with the aim of promoting reflection, awareness, and dialogue. All content is developed with respect for diversity and the dignity of all people.